Welcome to this edition of Meet the Candidates. I am Westchester County Legislator Judy Meyers, and I'll be meeting today with three Democratic candidates for the Village of Mamaroneck Board of Trustees, Bermudez-Hallstrom, Ilissa Miller, and Leon Potok. But first, joining me today is Judge Dan Gallagher. Dan is nearing completion of his first term as the Village of Mamaroneck judge and is seeking re-election on November 6th. He's a graduate of Fordham Law School, where he served on the law review, and he's been a practicing lawyer for 25 years. Dan, welcome, and for our viewers who are not very familiar with the Village Court, can you tell us a little bit about the court and especially about your experiences over the past 4 years?
Well, thank you, Judy, and it's always nice to see you. During my first 4 years on the bench, I have discovered that there are many people in the village and the community that really aren't familiar with the operation of the court and the responsibilities of the judge. For example, it may surprise you to know that the New York State Comptroller recently rated or ranked the Village of Mamaroneck Court as the 7th busiest town and village court in Westchester County.
Wow.
And so in addition to handling all criminal matters that arise in the jurisdiction of the village, the court also handles civil cases, it handles landlord-tenant matters, it handles and is responsible for code violations, and the court and judges on the court, myself, regularly preside over trials, both civil and criminal, including jury trials. Yeah. So we're a very, very busy court, and the job of a judge in the court is very demanding, and I believe that my performance over the past 4 years has demonstrated my firm commitment to the court, as well as my performance as a effective judge.
Have you made changes in the past 4 years?
It's a responsibility of the judge to always try to improve the operation of the court as well as the experience of visitors to the court. So I'm always making changes. For example, I've adjusted my calendar on Tuesdays to reduce the amount of waiting time that the many people that come to our court with parking tickets and traffic tickets have, and I think we've improved that experience. We've also, because of my concern and interest in safety, we've introduced a magnetometer which scans all visitors to our court, again for safety purposes and for the experience of people coming to our court. And we've recently hired two court officers who are dedicated to maintaining order in the court and, again, supervising the safety of people that visit our court. In addition, I'm very proud of the $30,000 in New York State grants that I have applied for and received for the village. We've used that to make very many improvements on the court, and in particular, we've used it for the construction of a first floor clerk's office and payment window so that business is conducted in our court can be streamlined so that people leaving the court no longer have to go up to the second floor to get forms and to make payments and inquire for information. And I think this is particularly helpful for the elderly that visit our court, as well as for people and parents with small children. So we're always making changes and hopefully making improvements.
And clearly not on the taxpayer's dollar for some of these improvements, which is
we do what
great.
We can.
Exactly. What else are you? I know you're involved in the village. What else have you been involved with?
Well, I believe to be an effective judge in the village, you have to be close to your community. You have to be involved. I have been a volunteer in many aspects of the village. I have been a long-term member of the Rhinebeck PTSA. I've served as a chairman of the safety committee, and I'm currently on the executive board of the PTSA. I have also been a member of the principal advisory committee for the middle school at Rhinebeck. In addition, I've been an advocate and a representative for Safe Routes to School, and among other things, and something that I've really found to be fun, is the time I've spent coaching many Mamaroneck boys and girls soccer, baseball, and basketball teams. So I'm involved in the community, and I really enjoy that aspect of my life here.
That is great. Is there anything else you'd like voters to know about your service as village justice? I would like to say that my wife Greta and I are
we feel so fortunate and so happy to be living in Mamaroneck and raising our children in this wonderful community. I'd like to assure the people of Mamaroneck that should I be reelected as judge of the Village of Mamaroneck, I will continue to serve with integrity, with common sense, with compassion, and with fairness in my conducting my operations of the court. And I thank you
That's
for being with me
fantastic.
tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. When we return, we will have our Democratic candidates for the Board of Trustees, Andres Bermudez-Hallstrom, Ilissa Miller, and Leon Potok. See you later. With 3 current members of the Village of Mamaroneck Board of Trustees not seeking re-election this year, the campaign is probably the most wide open that it's been in quite a long time. So it's a really great opportunity for Village of Mamaroneck voters to take a really good hard look at the challenges that are facing the Village of Mamaroneck today. And I am very pleased to have 3 candidates, 3 Democratic candidates with me today who are all 3 running for the Village of Mamaroneck Board of Trustees. I have Andres Bermudez-Hallstrom, who is an attorney with a private practice in Mamaroneck. Andres serves as a volunteer member of the Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee. He's a captain and commander in the Civil Air Patrol, and he lives in Washingtonville. We have Ilissa Miller, living in Rye Neck with her husband and son, and Ilissa is the CEO of I. Miller Public Relations, which is a marketing and business strategy consultancy for the international telecom industry. She served as a volunteer on the Mamaroneck Avenue Task Force Committee for more than 4 years. And last but certainly not least, we have Leon Potok, who has served as chairman of the Village Budget Committee since 2008, and for the last 2 years has also served on the Mamaroneck School District Budget and Finance Committee. He has a financial advisory firm that serves industrial labor unions, and he lives in Heathcote Hill with his wife and 3 children. And welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
This is, as we all know, a presidential election year, and voters will go to the polls on November 6th to cast their ballots for President of the United States. How do you convince and how do you get all of the residents and voters of this great village to continue to vote all the way down their ballot so that they will cast their ballots also for the local elections, because local elections do matter? Andres, how do you do it?
Well, Judy, I know that a lot of people struggle with who to vote for in local elections. I struggle with it, and I vote all the time for trustees, for school board, for library. And the thing is that local government is what affects me the most. Local government is what affects my quality of life, my finances, my access to government services. Now, in voting, I've learned that I've come to the conclusion that ballots should be the reverse of what they are now. It should be Board of Trustees, local government first, and then moving up to president, because local government affects me far more than who the president is.
Ilissa, what do you think? How can we get people to stay on the ballot?
Well, it's a big year, and it's going to be a big turnout. And as Andre said, more people are going to come out. And unlike Andres, I don't have the most perfect voter record. But the macro issues, which are certainly large, that's what gains the attention. That's what's being covered on the news. Mamaroneck Village issues are not being covered on the news, but those micro issues affect us the most. Land use, taxes, home values, those issues are what matter to us here on a local level. And that's so important. I don't think most people know that. And here's where they can make the most difference. Last year, the elections on a local level were apart just by 350 votes.
That's amazing.
It's absolutely amazing.
Every vote counts.
Yep.
Leon, what about you?
Well, for me, it was a long road to get here. Much like other residents in the community, I spent years where I didn't pay very close attention to local politics. But about 7 years ago, the village was hit with a number of lawsuits, and that's when I came to realize that what happens at the local level can affect the reputation of this community, the taxes we pay, and the value of our homes. We don't decide issues of war and peace at village government, but we make decisions that do affect the quality of life of people and their local taxes and the quality of the services they receive. So it's important for residents to pay attention to the election, to have their voices heard, and to cast a ballot in the local election.
Yeah.
'Cause
You
it matters.
mentioned the T word, taxes. You've been chair of the Village Budget Committee since 2008, which is, thank you, that is a tough job. Tell me about the recommendations that your committee has come up with.
One of the key challenges for the trustees is to come up with an operating budget every year and to look out long-term for the financial health of the village. The budget committee itself is an advisory committee. We provide advice to the trustees. The committee is made up of volunteers with a diverse background and experience, and we look to solve problems. We've come up with a number of recommendations that aim to raise revenues without raising property taxes, reduce costs, provide more transparency in the village, and improve operations in the village. Let me give you a couple of examples. At one of our meetings, we had the harbor master come, and out of that discussion, we realized with his input, and with his information, his knowledge, that there's an opportunity to increase the number of boat slips in the harbor.
Right.
That would require an investment, but it would quickly be paid back with the additional revenues. That's a relatively simple, straightforward approach to raising revenues. And as far as we know, nothing has happened. Let me give you another example. We looked at multi-space meters, and we recommended installing multi-space electronic meters on the avenue and in 3 of the parking lots that are near
And
the
several
downtown area.
municipalities have done that
A
already.
number of them. And it, without even raising rates, it generates additional revenue that
Sure.
more than pays for the cost of it. And just as importantly, provides data, provides information about
Oh, yeah.
how the space is being used. You know, what are the periods of peak utilization?
Sure.
Where in the village is it? And it provides a basis to help make additional decisions in the future as to parking. Lastly, we looked at unpaid parking tickets. There's a backlog of $750,000 in unpaid tickets and fines, and no one in the village is managing that.
Ooh, that's
That-
a chunk of change.
That's, in any business, one manages one's receivables.
Sure.
One goes after unpaid bills. No one does that locally, and we recommended that we actively engage in trying to get those
Sure.
tickets and fines paid. If we manage to get $200,000 paid, that's the equivalent of roughly 1% tax increase.
Yes.
So-
Now, Ilissa, you have your own business. I mean, you must relate to this very much.
Well, absolutely. And much like Leon, I too have served on committees in the village. It's accessibility to the invaluable resources of our village that's so important. It's smart people. We are so lucky to have people in our community that have business experience, that understand how economics work, and have creative solutions to problems. And one of the bigger issues that we had on the Mamaroneck Avenue Task Force Committee was the inability for the businesses and the residents to communicate effectively. And once they did, we realized that everyone had the same interests in mind.
Oh.
And those were the type of discussions that we had, and those were the type of discussions that spawned some great ideas like Mamaroneck Shares, as an
Oh, yeah.
example. Absolutely.
So successful.
Yeah.
Wow. And Andres?
Well, I think part of responsible budgeting has to be long-term planning. And part of long-term planning includes maintenance of the great assets that we have in this village. For example, there's the beach pavilion at the park. The roof of the pavilion leaks. It's been leaking for several years now. For the past 3 or so years, the village has budgeted money, has set aside money to fix that roof, but the fix hasn't happened. It's a modest investment, but if we make that investment, we can save this glorious building from further damage. So we need to spend a little now so that we can save a whole lot later.
Sure, absolutely. And matter of fact, to that point, a lot of communities in Westchester are trying to mitigate their budget problems by new real estate development and actually selling properties that are owned by the municipality to try to bring in more revenue. Do we have are there land use issues here going on in the village of Mamaroneck? Andres, are you aware of?
There are land use issues, and it's one of the more important issues going on in the village. I'm not against development. I'm not against increasing, the housing or whatever in the village. But all development has to be responsible. It has to be appropriate. We need to protect the character of the village, not just look at potential tax revenue. We need to look at how development is going to affect parking and traffic and our schools and flood mitigation. We need to take a holistic view. We need to look at development comprehensively, look at all the factors when we decide whether to develop or not.
Ilissa, what
I agree.
what would you add to that?
Absolutely
Based
agree.
on your background.
Though the village is absolutely so fortunate that we do have land to develop and we do have interest in investors and folks who want to develop our land. But we do need to be fiscally responsible. We do need to consider the environment and we do need to consider the unique character of our village. And that was put together so carefully and thoughtfully in our village's master plan. Not many villages, again, have a master plan that's been accepted and that has been put into practice, and we do. Ours was accepted rather recently. And so all of that was the input from our community members, from our residents here, that will enable us to grow. And so we should be following those guidelines, and that will help us.
Do you think, Leon, are there any potential land use issues out on the horizon that viewers should be aware of?
There are two. The first is in Orienta, the Hampshire Country Club.
Right.
The second is rezoning in Washingtonville. In the case of Hampshire, there was a change in ownership several years ago, and rumors have been rampant for years about what the owner's plans really were. So there's an expectation that something will come forth, rumors about how many units, what size units, how much of the green space will be preserved. That's out there.
What's the second one?
The second one is Washingtonville. There's a rezoning study that's sponsored by the village in partnership with the Washingtonville Housing Authority.
Oh, wow.
And it's looking towards transit-oriented development around the train station. And in both cases, the neighborhood residents will need to be informed. They'll need to be informed directly. They'll need to be informed through their neighborhood associations to understand what the impact will be on their...
Informed by the local government.
Right, and to figure out and to understand what the impact will be on the local neighborhoods. And they will need to give feedback to the trustees about their views about what impact these projects will have. And
I'm noticing a common thread here, if I can interject, that is really about communication and transparency and really working with the residents. How and what do you mean? I mean, we hear this phrase a lot, but what do you think, Ilissa, it really is meant by open and transparent government?
Well, owning my own public relations firm and focusing on business-related items, I consider myself a translator. Translate technical speak to business speak in a way that common people can understand it, and that's what our village needs. We need to be able to communicate and share information with our village in a way that they can understand it, that they can qualify it, and then they can get access to it. And transparency with the ability to educate and provide accessible information is really one of the only ways to do it.
Leon, what would you add to that, knowing what the negatives could be of not being transparent?
it's important to be transparent. It's important for transparency being not just providing a lot of information, but providing it in a way that people can understand it. We have volunteer committees that in effect in many cases serve as translators of information they collect. They're very active. They're monitoring, in their specific areas.
Sure.
And so we have dedicated, committed volunteers. We have dedicated, committed employees, managerial employees, rank and file employees, and we have elected officials who are dedicated for the good
Sure.
of the village as well. Unfortunately, in this village, all that dedication runs into a wall at times through a sense of inertia, because sometimes it is oftentimes worry and concern about maintaining the status quo
Sure.
and not changing.
Yeah.
And what we aim to bring to the village is a sense of urgency. Just as in the private sector, competition forces
Sure.
individuals and business entities to have a sense of urgency in what they do. So it is we hope to bring that into the village.
Would you agree with that?
I do agree. I believe a lack of transparency is a threat to the character of Mamaroneck as the friendly village. I think government works best when residents are empowered and have a stake in the decisions that are made. I think lack of transparency leads to a lot of conflict, including things like litigation. As an attorney, I can tell you that a lawsuit is the worst way to solve a problem. It's expensive and it doesn't leave anybody happy. Leon talked about the various committees. We have 17 volunteer committees with many, many dedicated citizens, and we should harness that real-world experience that those people have so that we can make informed decisions as Board of Trustees members.
You've been on an important committee here in the village of Mamaroneck dealing with our flood problems. What can be done by a local government, by the most local government you can get, what can be done to reduce the damaging effects of flooding?
Well, aside from being a member of the flood committee, I was also one of the people evacuated from Washingtonville during Hurricane Irene.
Oh.
And I also served at the shelter in the high school as a radio operator in 2007, and through the Civil Air Patrol as a ground team leader in 2011. Part of what I saw was a lack of information. For example, I received an alert from the village saying people in flood-prone areas should evacuate, but they don't mention what the flood-prone areas were. This lack of timely information leads to chaos and to unnecessary stress for residents.
Who are already stressed.
Who are already stressed out. When I was in the shelter, both times, both in 2007 and 5 years later, the shelter lost power, leaving everybody in the dark except for some emergency lights that were strung up.
And can they get a generator?
I have spoken to various village officials, both during the storm and after and through the flood mitigation committee, about a generator. I have not heard of the village taking any action regarding that. Now, in the shelter, the Red Cross volunteers were absolutely excellent.
Oh, yes.
But they can't really provide information as to what's going on outside of the gym, because that's not where they are, and they're not necessarily from around here. There's very little representation from the village at the shelter. There's a lack of information, so people didn't know if their houses were still standing, what they could do after the storm, or even if they could stay in the shelter overnight.
What would you do, Ilissa? I mean, the communications,
Absolutely,
again.
communication. But first off, thank you. I was one of those people in the shelter in 2011. And you're absolutely right. The Red Cross is phenomenal. All the volunteers there are phenomenal, but they're there to comfort you. They're not there to help you understand what's going on outside, whether or not your home is there and all that, and whether or not the streets are accessible, if you can get around, and if there's communication out in the world. What I think the village really needs is clear understanding about zoning and policies and procedures that will help
Before the flooding.
Bingo. And that will help our residents understand where they are, how potential floods could affect them, and also get access to resources for flood mitigation so that they can insure their house, not
flood
just through
insurance.
flood insurance, but through architectural design
Oh,
that is
sure.
affordable and accessible, and can provide assistance so that they don't have to have too many issues
Right.
to worry about.
Well, that leads right into what you can do with our existing bodies of water. Leon, you've had some
Well,
answers along those lines.
I mean, flooding is not new to the village. We have a flood mitigation advisory committee, and there have been a number of actions that have been recommended that the village ought to engage in on a regular basis to limit, to some extent, and mitigate flooding. Things like clearing obstructions in the rivers, silt removal, maintaining storm drains and catch basins as some of those examples. But those need to be done on a regular basis. They need to be managed so they get done on a regular basis efficiently and productively. Apart from that, we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared with information, just as Ilissa and Andres have talked about already.
You've done so much on a volunteer level here in the village, Leon. Here's a last wrap-up type question. Why are you running? You could keep going on as a volunteer. You'd be a volunteer anyway, but why?
Well, I have invested 21 years with my wife and 3 children in this community, in Mamaroneck, 14 of them in the village in Heathcote Hill. In my work life, I perform financial analysis of companies, of businesses, and I thought it important to make a contribution to the village. Being on the village budget committee has been an eye-opener. We've made recommendations. Unfortunately, they have been ignored. They have not been implemented as far as we have been able to tell. And I'm looking to serve in order to change that approach, in order to work productively with the administration, with the other trustees, with volunteer committees, to make things happen
Yes.
and for the better of the village residents.
Ilissa, why are you running?
Well, I've always been an activist and into customer service and community service. So it's definitely a natural extension from where I come from. But the way that I look at our village board is just like any other corporate board. And you need to have diversity. You need to have all different types of people thinking and bringing different and their own unique approaches and strengths in order to be able to serve the village effectively. And I think that, well, if I don't mind saying so myself, that Leon, Andres, and myself, we all complement one another.
That's
and
very
that,
clear.
And that is the definition of any kind of successful board out in the corporate world or, in the private sector versus the public sector. And that's what I hope that our community sees.
And Andres, you will undoubtedly continue to volunteer, but tell me why you're running for the Board
I
of
will.
Trustees.
I've lived in Westchester most of my life, so I'm 22 years now, and my entire adult life has been spent in public service of one form or another. I love living in Mamaroneck. I love walking down the avenue and seeing the sound from Orient and from Sound Shore, and I want to use my almost decades of public service experience to the betterment of the village and of my neighbors.
This village would be so fortunate to have the 3 of you serving on their Board of Trustees. And that's about all the time we have today, but we would like to thank Andres Bermudez-Hallstrom, Ilissa Miller, and Leon Potok, who are the 3 Democratic candidates for the Board of Trustees, and you can find out much more about them going online at mamaroneckdems.org. So thank you all for sharing your time and your great ideas and your enthusiasm for this village. And as a final reminder to everyone who's watching, Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th. You'll be able to vote for several offices from President of the United States all the way to Village of Mamaroneck Board of Trustees for the Village of Mamaroneck, the local government. So please remember to vote, stay on the ballot all the way till the end, and thank you so much and good night.